I'm Sarah Flounders from the International Action Center. I had the honor to travel to Syria last September at a time of great risk, and I had visited Syria in the past, Palestinian conferences. Welcome, Ramsey. And tonight we're here to hear about what is a great accomplishment by a people under relentless attack, more than 3 years. And this election was a historic accomplishment. The Syrian government has been a target of regime change, demonized by the Western media, a third of the population displaced, entire cities looted. And for 3 years, the media has predicted, and US officials, that the government would collapse any day now, any day, any week, any month. But Syria held on and reorganized and protected and defended those who were homeless, those who were displaced, managed to beat back the insurgency, who were using terror tactics with top funding from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, all with US and NATO coordination. Really tens of thousands, a mercenary army from 68 countries, if you can imagine. It attracted mercenaries, fanatics, and pirates of the planet to Syria. And this election, imagine defending 9,000, more than 9,000 polling places on election day. Isn't that an accomplishment? A quite incredible accomplishment. Now, US wars are organized to bring chaos, to sow dissension, ethnic and religious divisions. It's the old policy of divide and conquer. And it's systematic. It's not an accident. It's the way the wars are fought. And it creates a horror that lasts a generation and more. We can see the heritage of it in Iraq today. And as the ambassador so well explained, ISIS, the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq, a fanatical, subsidized group, funded by the Saudis, yes, but organized and coordinated by US and NATO forces. The Syrians know what they're fighting to prevent, and they know what the future holds if they fail. Millions of Syrians choose unity and sovereignty. And tonight's program is organized with our good friends in the Syrian American Forum. It's so important that here in the US today, there is such a strong Syrian American voice, defending and explaining Syria to people in the US who see that every war brings destruction to US cities. As Dr. Martin Luther King said in an earlier time, that the bombs that fall in Vietnam fall in the cities of the US, and that's even more so true today. It takes great courage, I'm sure, for Syrian Americans to speak out and to hold firm. And I want to especially thank Aveen Durkee, a poet and an artist, who helped in this program and in others. Tonight's program is also co-sponsored by the Syrian Solidarity Movement that has helped nationally in building solidarity with Syria in forums and in meetings. And these 5 delegates will do so much to explain in just a few minutes each their explanations, what they saw, each of them a different vignette, and each of them were actually in different polling areas, different cities across Syria. And their contribution at the press conference organized today at the UN with the UN Correspondents Association, it just gave a real description. So I think everyone here will understand more what's happening in Syria today, listening to them. Our first speaker is Scott Williams. He's the national coordinator of an anti-imperialist youth organization here in the U.S. called FIST, Fight Imperialism, Stand Together. He's also an organizer with the International Action Center, and he's mobilized demonstrations against U.S. wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and Syria, and for several years was a union organizer of low-wage workers. He was also active with the Occupy Wall Street movement. So Scott Williams to lead off.
Thank you. Here's the tape. Yeah.
Wow, well, first of all, it is my honor to speak first out of our delegation, to report back on our tremendous trip to really see what democracy in action looks like. Again, my name is Scott Williams with the International Action Center, and I've been active since 2007, organizing against the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and now the conflicts going on in Ukraine and Venezuela, and again in Iraq. All of us are going to share our stories, but I wanted to start with a little bit of a political analysis and then go into my trip. And I wanted to start here, right in the U.S. So, as election observers, we did this because we believe in real democracy. The ultimate aim of democratic elections are to serve as a test of the people's desires, of the hopes and dreams of millions of people in any country. Yet, as we know, every election has its shortcomings, and some more than others. And that's why I wanted to start here in the U.S. So the most obvious example of flawed elections that I could think of comes from the United States. We choose from our politicians who are millionaires, who spend all day fighting each other over who can give more tax breaks, more budget cuts, start more wars, and give more concessions to big businesses. Decisions to spend over 50% of the budget on the Pentagon are made in country clubs, in executive suites, and by friendly handshakes of people who went to college together in elite Ivy League schools. Here we have voter participation, which is limited by the difficult voter registration requirements. And also, voting is limited by income and frankly, by the lack of faith in the political process. And that's why we've seen in almost every election that over a majority of people do not vote. And as they say, not voting is a vote, and it's a vote against the system. So in 2008, we remember it was a historic election of President Barack Obama here in the United States. This was the biggest turnout in quite a while, with 57% of voters voting in the presidential election. Yet still, in a country of 300 million people, and only a portion of which are adults, 51 million people in the United States were not even registered to vote. They couldn't even go to the polls. That's over a quarter of the adult population. And then the number of people who were barred where they went to go vote, and then their election was thrown out, their voting was thrown out in 2008, was more than the margin of the previous two presidential elections, to show you how much there are just consistent problems with what they call the so-called democracy here. Still that year, 58 countries across the world had a greater turnout, including Iran, Russia, Bolivia, Venezuela, countries all over the world. The U.S. ranked in the bottom half. If you compare the Syrian election this year, just 2 weeks ago, it would rank as the 20th highest vote in the entire world as far as voter turnout. And that's given the conditions of millions of refugees, of millions of people displaced from their homes, and of the U.S. and NATO countries limiting the vote of Syrian refugees in the United States and throughout Europe, and in the Gulf states as well. So given the conditions, I think that it shows you what real democracy looks like. The West has a bad habit of holding up Europe and North America as bastions of democracy. Commentators from Brussels to Washington can use convenient demands all over the world for free and fair elections. And we see this almost every week. They're trying to appeal to people's basic idea of democracy and self-rule. But when the U.S. touts democracy, it conveniently is reflecting its own bias, or ignoring its own bias, and looking for its own local rule of a small group of leaders that will compromise with the IMF, that will compromise with NATO, and that will compromise with the demands of the U.S. military and corporations. And that is the problem that the U.S. has with Dr. Bashar al-Assad, and that is the problem that the U.S. has with people all over the world. And, it's tremendous. Visiting Syria, you could see that the Syrian people have given up so much. And not just in the most recent 3 years of war, but over the decades. We realize that the role of the IMF in Syria over the past decades has caused many gift backs. Where Syria's had to pay back millions in foreign debt and with extorted interest rates. And Syrians have had to raise the prices on subsidized food and gasoline and social programs that people need. And we realize there's serious givebacks that have been happening for at least the last decade. What makes this even worse, though, is that the right-wing insurgents, whatever they call the so-called rebels, which I'll never use that word, they've robbed over 1,000 factories and equipment in just the city of Aleppo alone. And this has cost over $200 billion in one city, $200 billion Syrian pounds of damage. Worse yet, they're stealing Syrian oil, estimates of over $600 million a year of revenue that goes for the Syrian people. And they destroyed over 600 medical facilities across the country. We learn the gruesome stories of people and what this means to them, and they describe this as living in a horror movie, as you can imagine. But, with crisis, there comes a fight back. And in Syria, for the days before and after the election that we were there, millions of Syrians came out to support their president. Some of them have serious challenges and needs from the government, but just like any internal conflict that a group faces, they unite when they're fighting a common enemy. And that is the difference between the crisis in Syria and the things that we see across so-called sectarian violence and the chaos that's been created by U.S. imperialism. The people of Syria are united, and the people of Syria will never lose to the U.S. And that was the feeling that I got. I toured Ceuta on election day in southern Syria, and I was with a group of Venezuelans, Bolivians, Brazilians, and along with Jane. I hope she'll share her stories as well. And in Ceuta, there were spontaneous gatherings everywhere in the city. We must have visited 15 polling places, and every single place you go, there are people left and right who, it looks like the town is having the biggest celebration it's ever had. And that's because the people are out in support of their government. And that unity is what can defeat the U.S. attacks. And as someone in the United States who cares about democracy, who cares about freedom, and who cares about a government which provides for the people's needs, to me, it was really motivating to come back to the U.S. and bring this story and take this. And that's why I'm excited to say that we are organizing across the United States a tour in cities. Next week, we're going to be in Philadelphia. I think tomorrow, Joe is going to be in Chicago. We're going to be all over the country spreading, showing our pictures, telling our stories, and coming together with people from the Syrian American Forum, with all of our friends and allies across the political movement to come and tell the story of why the Syrian people are setting the standard, and the Syrian people are really leading the way, and we owe it so much to them, and we need to support them. And lastly, I just want to say, our demand, it's clear. We've been using the demand, U.S. hands off Syria. And that it's been effective in a lot of ways. But we must be clear, and especially with the unfolding situation in Iraq, we must be clear that the only way to stop this war and the only way for people anywhere to get freedom and real freedom, we must disarm the United States, and the people who can do that are the people here in the United States by creating a political movement to stop these wars and stop spending trillions on devastation and misery for millions of people. I'm honored to be here today. I'm excited to hear more personal stories, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Scott Williams. This sound isn't really working, I think, so we'll just let it go. Our next speaker is Jane Stillwater, and Jane is a freelance journalist, travel writer, and a blogger. She's traveled widely throughout the world, also been an embedded journalist. She works part-time as a paralegal and also as an actor, and she's the mother of 4 children. So Jane Stillwater.
Thank you. And this is no act. I haven't slept in a couple of days, and I've noticed that the more tired I get, the more general my comments get. So I'll start with the specific and go to the general. How many of you here have actually been to Syria? Raise your hand. Well, then I don't have to tell you. Syria is wonderful. The people of Syria are just wonderful. And as for the election, when I was a child, I used to watch my mother running a polling place in her home and watch her stay up late and count the ballots. So I know from early experience what a fair election looks like. I also reported on recent presidential elections in Florida and Ohio, and we all know what happened there. And of course, I myself have voted many times over the year, but I have never seen anything in the States even close to the enthusiasm and even outright joy that I witnessed while observing the elections in Syria. Do I think that they were a valid election? You bet. Okay, so then from there I went kind of like, okay, let's talk about ISIS. And this is the speech that I gave today at the UN. After being an election observer in Syria, I see ISIS from a whole new perspective. Every time I hear the phrase Islamic militant, I cringe. ISIS members are not Muslims. Let's get this clear. They are not Muslims. They are no more Muslims than Adolf Hitler was a Christian, even though he claimed to be. Muslims believe in compassion and justice. These ISIS guys are pirates. ISIS' main modus operandi in Syria was to move into a city or town, kill or drive out the civilian population, and then loot, slash, and burn. They were pirates. And the same thing happened in Mosul, where the first thing ISIS did was to loot the central bank of $500,000 while flying their
Billion.
billion. Good. I'm glad you guys are listening. I'm still kind of tired. And you've all seen the ISIS flag. It's a black and white Jolly Roger. And ISIS doesn't want to capture Baghdad either. What it was after was the oil refinery. ISIS doesn't want to convert anyone to Islam. All they want is show me the money. And American taxpayers are paying billions of dollars to weaponize and train these crooks and robbers. And I went on to compare Bush and Cheney with Bluebeard, who gave birth to ISIS, and Obama is no Captain Jack Sparrow either. Okay, so now I'm really generalizing. I'm tired, I need to sleep. So I'm just really generalizing. Here it goes. I read somewhere that there are 4 things that human beings need to survive: air, water, food, and to feel good about themselves. Yet, despite me knowing this, I'm afraid that in the name of truth, I'm going to have to ignore this all and make a whole lot of people on Wall Street and Wall Street feel very bad about themselves. Sorry about that. Lately, everyone on the news has been talking constantly about the 70th anniversary of D-Day. D-Day this, D-Day that. But I have yet to hear anyone talking head mention the recent 100th anniversary of World War I. Probably the most unnecessary and, just plain stupid war ever fought. But sadly, America's